Hello guys, welcome back to Legal Banter. Now 2020 was an unforgettable year, not only because of Corona and the ensuing pandemic, but because of some superior quality of content that we got to witness on the OTT platform. That's why I thought it would be a good idea for a video where I give you a recap of the year 2020 through the channel of web series. Now I'm going to talk about 6 of my favorite series where I will be discussing and give you a basic idea of the plotline, and I will tell you how certain learnings from these series can be helpful for a student of law or even a student of Indian polity. Now you may tend to disagree with me over the views and the opinion that I may hold over a series, but then that is to each his own. I'm just trying to bridge the gap and probably make it a little easier to understand certain technical legal concepts as and when they are depicted through the medium of these series. So let's start. The first series in my list is Jamtara. This Netflix original series that released in 2020 revolves around a scam, a phishing scam. Phishing with a P, not with an F. There's a group of young men who come together and they start conducting these online frauds. Now basically what they do is they pose as employees from important institutions like banks, etc., and they try to get confidential financial information from people like their OTP or their credit card or debit card numbers. Now there are rumors that it is based on a reality that actually happened in the state of Chhattisgarh. There is a district called as Jamtara in Chhattisgarh where from this series is based upon. As a student of law or even a student of an Indian polity, there are a couple of things that you can relate to. The first and foremost is that through this series, it gives you a glimpse into the world of cyber crimes. It helps a common man understand what is phishing, how does it take place, and how can it be a very disadvantageous thing, what disastrous effect can phishing have. It also tells a layman in a negative sense how to avoid from getting caught up in a scam of phishing, because when you watch things like these online, they sort of send a signal down in your brain that you are going to be a little more cautious the next time you may receive an unknown phone call where the person may be asking you to probably click on a link or provide you the OTP that has come. Now obviously we as people of this generation may not be that easy to fool, though the number is not 0%, but such scams usually target the older generation or the middle-aged generation, and for them this series is a very good example to learn and beware of such things in future. The second and the most important thing that I believe that could be a learning from this series is that it also brings up the issue of rampant youth unemployment. Now thanks to Jio and Mr. Ambani, we did get unlimited data packs, we've got continuous internet connectivity, but what we haven't been able to match that with is equal opportunities. So when the youth has a lot of information technology on their hand, they have industrious minds, but they don't have good places to put that mind and technology to work. Obviously, series like Jamtara or phishing scams like the one depicted in Jamtara are born. The next series is Panchayat. Now this series is available on Amazon Prime, and it's a wonderfully woven tale that not only depicts the beauty of rural India but also depicts the contrast and the divide that exists between the rural India and the city India. Now this story revolves around a city-bred guy who, because of unemployment and lack of employment opportunities, is forced to look for opportunities in government employment, and as a result of that he is able to get a job as a Panchayat secretary in a remote village in UP. Through this story, there are so many issues that are brought up and they're left on the table for discussion. The series may mention them sparingly or even probably touch them very slightly, but each of these issues are important in themselves and can be used as an initiation for discussions, either as a student of law or for a student of Indian polity. I believe one of the most important issues that the series touches upon is women empowerment and its depiction in the Indian polity. Now we all know that this bill where 33% reservation for women is being sought in the legislature has been pending for the longest possible time, And as a result of that, in the interim, the government has come up with this provision where certain wards or certain constituencies are reserved for women candidates. Now what happens is that because these categories or places are marked for women candidates, the women candidates that actually represent those constituencies are not actually politicians, they are not actually leaders, but they are forced to bring themselves up to that level. What happens in such cases most oftenly, and unfortunately in Pune where I stay, my constituency is also one such example where the women candidate who represents is just a namesake. Her husband actually controls the entire thing, and that's exactly what is depicted in Panchayat. So it tries to bring into discussion this important issue that if we believe that reserving seats for women candidates is a representation of women empowerment, but we somewhere fail to understand that if it is not done in the manner so required, it obviously will be a futile effort. The second issue that this series also touches upon are various issues that rural India is still struggling from, right from lack of good roads to availability of electricity and other requirements like sanitation and other civic amenities. This series once again brings it into discussion, the requirement, the constant need for improvement and the development of our rural areas. This series very nicely yet very simply also puts forth the issue of unemployment. It brings to the core this issue of lack of employment opportunities, especially in big cities, and how as a result of that the Indian youth is either being misdirected or they're picking up jobs that they're not satisfied with. This movie depicts the reality of such times. Apart from this, through this series, we also get to witness various governmental procedures and the problems that surround them. For example, what happens or what is the procedure that you have to follow when you have to apply for a solar panel, a government subsidized solar panel, or for example, if you have to get a registration of your birth certificate of a child that has been born, or you have to register a death certificate, then what is the process that has to be followed, how technical this process sometimes tends to become, and how because of this technicality, it unnecessarily increases the time that such processes takes. So this series is a huge recommendation from my side. For the first time, Filmfare conducted the web series awards for year 2020, and this series has won a lot of awards, all for the right reasons, very well deservedly, and I will definitely recommend you catch this on Amazon Prime. The next series on my list is an absolute favorite of mine, and I'm sure the ones of you who have watched this would have definitely liked it too. The series name is Paatallok. This series is available on Amazon Prime, and this is a production venture of Anushka Sharma. Now, this series is a very hard-hitting tale. It does not showcase you things in a very polite manner, or it does not show you things in a sugar-coated manner. It shows you the stark reality of the Indian scenario. Right from what is the scenario and the difference that is there, for example, since this movie sets up in the city of Delhi, it showcases the class divide that is there when you move from North Delhi to West Delhi and then finally to South Delhi. In fact, the reason why this series is called Paatallok, because this is a reference to the people who live in West Delhi, and according to the narrator of the show, they are the people who are the most downtrodden, because that is where most of the crimes occur. I will not give you a lot of spoilers. I will recommend you to go and watch these series, but as a student of law or a student of Indian polity, you can focus on some of the issues that this series focuses on. For example, very starkly, this series brings out the issue of child abuse. Through one of the protagonists, there are 4 accused in the show, in the series, and one of the accused is a transgender who was sexually abused when the person was a minor. So this series shows in a very realistic manner the kind of abuse that children have to go through, especially orphans or abandoned children, and the matter seems to get worse if the child is a transgender or belongs to the queer community. So this is very nicely portrayed in the series. Another issue that the series brings upon is the caste divide and the social divide. I mentioned about how is the series named so. Apart from that, it is also depicted throughout through the stories, the backstories of the 4 protagonists that are there. Two of those characters have a very strong history of being abused because of the low caste that they belong to. The main character, the main accused, Hathoda Tyagi, has a background where his sisters were sexually abused, they were raped, and hence as a result of that, he gets into this business of crimes. Another accused, one of the 4 in the group, also used to belong to the lower caste, and as a result of that, his parents were also troubled. So the caste divide and the social divide that happens because of that is also very realistically represented in the series. Another thing for which I really recommend watching this series as a student of law is to understand how in ground the police actually works, right from how cases are allocated, the internal politics that goes about, and how on a ground reality the investigation of police takes place, right from trying to pin the crime over one or the other, trying to shift burden, trying their best not to do the job that they have to. It shows you all sides of the police force. Obviously, since the main protagonist is played by a police officer, they couldn't show it in too much of a bad light, but they did. They were able to point out certain lacunas that our police system suffers from. And finally, this series also talks about and it showcases the bad effects of media trial. Somewhere where this so-called fourth estate has somewhere forgotten the limits and the scope to which they can exercise this freedom of speech and expression also becomes a focal point in the series. It shows that how in the quest of TRPs, how in the quest of gaining more in a viewership and popularities, media houses can stoop to any levels. I will definitely recommend you watching this series. The next series on my list is Scam 1992. Now this is a spectacular series for anybody who's even remotely interested in understanding the basic functioning of the stock market or to have a better understanding of certain aspects of investment law. Now this is based on the real life story of Harshad Mehta, the famous stockbroker who was responsible for crashing the stock market in 1992 when he was able to exploit certain loopholes in the banking regulation system as well as the lack of regulation by SEBI in the capital market regulation, as a result of which he was able to carry out a humongous scam on the market. Now this series is an excellent example of how a series should be, and the learnings that this movie can depict are also accurate and proper in the manner that they are shown. The first and foremost learning is obviously for anybody who does not know about the Harshad Mehta scam or who may have known about the scam but probably did not know the intricate details of how the scam was committed, what were the factors that contributed to the scam being such a large scale scam and affecting the stock market so gravely. Such people can definitely watch this show to get a better understanding of the scam. You can also consider this series as Investment Law 101. This series can easily be considered as an introduction to the investment law, to the concepts of investment law. Small things like what is a stockbroker, how is a jobber different from a stockbroker, why was SEBI so inefficient in the early 1990s, what happened because of which SEBI was converted into a statutory and regulatory body, are all these issues very, very well researched and depicted nicely in the series. This series is also a wonderful example to understand how scams, whether they are social, whether they are economic or they are securities based like this one, do not happen at the behest of one single person. It is always inevitably found out later on that the government has had some role to play in making the scam go big. This series also showcases the nexus that Harshad Mehta, the character, the titular character of the series, enjoyed, the nexus that he had, the proximity that he had with the Congress government in power at that time, and how because of that he was able to get the protection, he was able to escape from the rigors of law, specifically from the rigors of RBI because of the political affiliation that he enjoyed. So this series puts forth that in very prime focus. Fourthly and lastly, through this series, a student of probably banking law or investment law, securities law will also understand that what are the lacunas that our securities system, the stock market in general, or the regulation of SEBI suffers from. It also brings to point the various regulations that were needed to make the banking system better, to make it less vulnerable to such scams from happening. This series depicts them very nicely. Again, a must watch on my recommendation. The next series on my list is Churails. Now this series is available on ZEE5 and again is a must watch on my recommendation. This is not an out and out legal drama or does not even have a very direct connotation to any aspects or subjects of law, but for a student of social polity or Indian polity or probably feminist jurisprudence, this show can be a good reference point. This show basically is centered around the theme of a group of 4 women coming together, forming a detective agency where they take it upon themselves to figure out the cheating and the unfaithful husbands, and they try to teach them lessons in their own way. Now this series becomes a wonderful example of what feminism should look like. We all, in the garb of what feminism should be, keep talking about sometimes unequal opportunities or added advantages that are expected to be given to the women community. But this series is actually a realistic depiction of a solution to the problem. It shows that you can be feminist without unnecessarily stamping down on the male community. Feminism is not about making women higher than men, it is about giving them a level playing field. And that is what is the beauty of this series. This series focuses on 2 main issues. One, the societal expectations that a woman is burdened in the society, how she is expected to be an ideal daughter, an ideal wife, an ideal daughter-in-law. From every role that she plays, she is expected nothing but perfection. And secondly, how this tends to become an issue when we talk about women empowerment in rudimentary societies, in repressive systems. Again, it showcases that without necessarily fighting and waging a war against a society, in their own small niche world, feminism can still be exercised. It actually makes me, it actually reminded me of this scene in another movie, another women-centric movies, Sex and the City 2, where again, when the group of 4 friends have gone on a holiday to Dubai, when they're actually being pursued by a group of religious-minded men, when they do something which is considered to be blasphemous, and when they're trying to run away and escape, they're actually saved by a group of Muslim women who on the exterior seem like the ones who follow the norms of the Muslim society, but when they actually step with them in another interior room, they do see that each of these women has an independent personality. They have embraced fashion the way they wanted to, at the same time not necessarily fighting with their society. The last series on my list is Criminal Justice Behind Closed Doors. Now this is season 2 of this series, which released 2 years ago. This series focuses on a very controversial issue yet and unexplored in the Indian context, the issue of marital rape. Now we all know, unfortunately, section 375 of the Indian Penal Code does not criminalize or considers marital rape as an offence, which means that it is considered in the Indian society that once a woman is married to a man, they are presumed to be allowed access to each other at all times, and even when any of them is not willing to participate in a sexual act, it is deemed that the consent is always there. Now this issue is more problematic at so many levels, but I'm not going to talk about that in detail. I will be making a series on the issue of consent and its depiction in the Indian law as well as through Indian films and series. So stay tuned for that. Let's come back to this series. Now this series, the same way that the earlier prequel progresses, again focuses on the trial of a woman. This time this woman is being tried for committing the murder of her husband. The issue of marital rape is the central backdrop of this theme, and it explores what all goes into making this such a problematic issue. As a student of law or human polity, you can consider some issues to be of relevance. First and foremost, this series is an actual gold mine for a student of constitutional law, criminal law, or even anybody who's studying or is interested in human rights. This series showcases the three pillars of criminal administration of justice or our criminal justice system, which are police, the courts and the jails. It depicts the problems, the lacunas that each of these levels suffer from, and how their intrinsic problem compounds the problem when you move from one level to the other. How, if police does not do their job properly, or if they're prejudiced when they're investigating a case, or if they've colluded with the accused in the case, then it will definitely have a bearing, it will have an adverse bearing on the case when it goes for trial before the judge. And if a judge, owing to either media pressure or an unwarranted understanding of law or some other reasons, may decide the case in the manner which is not justice oriented, which is injustice on the accused that is there, it will further lead to deterioration of human rights of that person when he goes into judicial custody in the jails. So through the progression in the story, this depiction in the deteriorating state of a human being is depicted very nicely. This series is also a very important example to illustrate how the Indian legal system still suffers from having a proper system in place for admitting the testimonies of child witnesses. Now, IPC does somehow completely overrule the fact that children of a particular age cannot be considered as competent witnesses, therefore their testimonies are not admissible. But they still need a system in place, there is a procedure in place that is required. The Juvenile Justice Act provides for some, there is something provided under the Commission for Child Welfare as well, but all of those are not very well connected, and that poses a lot of problems and a lot of areas and opportunities for this child witness to be either influenced, intimidated or troubled, or rather frightened by being approached by law. So this also is of prime focus in this series. Another issue that this movie focuses on is the elements of what amounts to a legal judicial custody, or how you may talk about in a utopian world that judicial custody is important and it is important for this and this reason. But when you look at it from a realistic point of view, keeping in mind the situation in India where we already struggle with overpopulation, obviously our jails are overpopulated as well, resources are always scarce, issues of hygiene, sanitation, food, safety, medical facilities are raging issues that any person may suffer when they're in the judicial custody. So this series also again brings those issues to the core. And finally, from an academic point of view, through this series, you also get to understand the thin line of difference that exists between culpable homicide and murder. Section 299 and 300 are interwoven. For a student of criminal law or somebody who's just starting to study criminal law, understanding this difference becomes very important. Probably, if I were to explain this in layman's terms, I would want to say that culpable homicide is going to be a murder in cases where there is intention to commit the act of murder. However, in case where you commit an act which may not result in immediate murder, that becomes culpable homicide. Something that may result in the consequent death, like it happens in this series as well, the offense gets converted from culpable homicide to culpable homicide amounting to murder. And the difference between culpable homicide amounting to murder and murder is the absence or lack of knowledge. When you do something knowing for a fact that this will cause the death of a person, it no more remains culpable homicide. It definitely will be considered by the court as murder. So to understand this difference and to see its actual practical application, this series will definitely be on my list of recommendations if you haven't watched this series already. This series also explores a lot of smaller subplots. For example, what goes into the judge's mind when they're deciding a ground of bail, should bail be granted, that is highlighted in the series. Then what happens if an infant is born in judicial custody? To whom will the custody of that child belong to? What will be the parameters or grounds on which the state will decide are also left for open discussion in the series. Another subplot that this series also focuses on is how negative media trial takes away and affects the right to fair trial of a accused. In the series, it is shown that because the person who was killed, or the person who was stabbed to death by the accused in the case, was a person who was very famous and popular, it brings in a lot of negative publicity for the accused, which also affects her, not only her integrity, but also her peace of mind. I also want to believe that this series also wants to start discussions, important discussions, on how society continues to subjugate our females. How women, even in the modern world, women who are even part of these so-called modern societies, are expected to be the usherers of everything that is right and fair. They are supposed to be considered as apostles of virtue, and nothing wrong should ever be committed by them. This is shown not only when the person is out in the society, but even when the prime accused is in the jail, and when her husband dies consequent to the wounds that she had inflicted. The other female inmates, some of them who were victims of being beaten by their own husbands, are not okay with the idea of a wife murdering her husband. I will definitely want you to watch this series. Quite honestly, lockdown was a difficult time for all of us. Watching these entertaining and thought-provoking series not only kept me glued to the screen and helped me spend my time a little better, but at the same time kept me connected to my subject as well. I hope if you haven't watched these series already, you do give them a try based on my recommendations, and you get back to me in the comment section if you have anything more to add. I hope you liked the video and you learned something new. Please share if you liked the video. I will post regular videos every weekend, so do press the notification bell. Subscribe to my channel Legal Banter, and thanks for watching.